Okay, this is Having Tea with Voodoo Dollies, and my name's Kevin, and this is...
I'm Ryan Johnson, also known as RJ, the road manager for Blood on the Dance Floor.
So, do you mind telling us, how did you become the manager for Blood on the Dance Floor?
Unwillingly, actually. No, I've known their management for a long time, and we kept in touch, and they got a hold of me and said, "Hey, are you doing anything? We have a new client that we'd love to have you out on." And I did a little research on the band, and I was up for a challenge, so here we are.
What did you do before becoming a tour manager?
You have to go back a ways. I'm 32 now, which doesn't seem that old, but I have to dye my hair now because it gets gray. If you go back to my early teens, I played in bands off and on. I was a drummer, bass player. I did live sound in like grade school, high school. I was a mobile DJ for a long time, worked in nightclubs and stuff like that. And then I just wanted to do more. I wanted to tour around. I wanted to play with the big toys, and just kind of got into doing audio, live sound. And then eventually that turned into tour managing. Because a lot of bands nowadays, they want someone who can handle more responsibilities, so they don't have to pay two people, a lot of money.
Right.
It's easy. You save money if you have one guy doing two jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of was forced into tour managing, but now I enjoy it because I get to call the shots for the most part. So
That's cool. As far as tour managing, what are the responsibilities? Like, what do you have to take care of besides the members and their shenanigans?
I'll give you the short version. Basically, it's everything that happens on the road: logistics, health. You book the hotels. You make sure you have tour buses. You make sure you have fuel for the tour buses. You make sure that all of the venues are set up properly. You make sure that your crew's taken care of. Pretty much anything and everything that you can think of that involves a tour at the top level, all the way down to, how many cables do we have for Drew's lighting rig. I have to make sure that everyone's taken care of in every aspect. So.
That's cool. Well, it sounds like you kind of became a tour manager. You said you didn't really think about it until it kind of came upon you. So how does someone kind of become a tour manager? I mean, you came upon it through experience, but what about someone that hasn't?
I would say don't. do something else. Go to college. Get a master's degree. If you are a glutton for punishment, then my suggestion would be start small. Find a local band that you enjoy, and just start working with them. Find out what their needs are. Are they touring? Do they need a van? Do they need a trailer? Do they need someone to help them sell merch? Basically, just all tour managing really is handling all of the business and the logistics on the road, so that way the band can just come in and essentially do their show, and they don't have to worry about where are we staying tonight, do we have gas in the van, or whatever the case is.
Right.
So for those of you that want to get into tour managing, again, I would probably seek mental health first, just to make sure that you weren't dropped on your head. But if it's something you really want to do, I would suggest start small. Start small, work with bands, and try to hook up with nightclubs, rock and roll clubs, venues that do national acts. Get in there on the ground floor, intern with promoters and things like that, because you'll be interfacing with the tour managers and the production managers and those bands, and you'll kind of get like a feel of how it's supposed to happen, in the professional aspect. So, and be prepared to make a lot of mistakes, and you got to have thick skin, and you got to know when to man up and admit when you're wrong. So you're going to make a lot of mistakes, but the trick is to not repeat the same mistake. And when you do make mistakes, try to cover them up as fast as you can, so nobody finds out. And don't steal ever. Be honest. That's a huge thing. You got to be honest. You got to be straightforward, because you can back yourself into a corner really quick.
Well, you're saying like going to venues. How do people make contacts? I mean, some people believe, okay, I'm just going to go into Whiskey Go Go, sit there and introduce myself to whoever manages the place, employees or whatever, and that's how I'm going to build my contacts. But how would you go about doing that?
I mean, it's kind of as simple as that sometimes. You can walk into, a nightclub, say the Whiskey Go Go, and talk to the bartender and just find out who manages the place, or, who is the show manager for the events, and then just talk to that person and say, hey man, I'm wanting to get into the business. Be willing to work for free, because if you don't have any experience, a lot of people are going to be apprehensive to bring you on. So just, be willing to do anything and everything that it takes to get to that point. It's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll.
So it sounds like you have a lot of excitement as far as being a tour manager. What's it like in the day, like just day in life of a tour manager?
I'm gonna order shit rainbows.
I would say go out and buy these two movies: Spinal Tap.
Oh God.
And Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Specifically, the first 20 minutes of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. It's not always about all of the mind-altering recreational substances, but there is some cynical humor in that first 20 minutes that really kind of defines, a tour manager's daily life. Spinal Tap is another one. People think that it's a joke, which it was a mockumentary, but a lot of people don't realize that it's so embellished, it's so over the top, it's actually true. A lot of the things that take place in that movie as a joke actually happened in the 70s and 80s.
Can you turn your amp up to 11?
My guys don't. I don't let them turn up that loud, but I have worked with other artists in the past that definitely try to get their amps up to 11. So, and in a 300 or 400 or 500 seat room, it's in Spinal Tap basically.
Yeah.
Pretty funny movie.
Yeah.
All right. So let's say you do build your contacts up with a local venue, whatever. A lot of bands nowadays, they have to pay to play. So what do you think about pay to play?
I think if it's in the right market, pay to play works. I mean, obviously, if you're in Hollywood or something, I mean, it's Hollywood. It was the scene in the 70s and 80s. Nowadays, it's not so glamorous, at least in my humble opinion. But pay to play. You look at it this way: if you're a beginning band and you want to make it, you're going to have to do something to prove your work, right? So you may not necessarily have to, buy onto a tour or buy onto a show, but you're going to approach, a headlining act or a venue promoter or a show promoter and say, hey, we'd like to open up for some shows we have. And what they're going to do essentially is they're going to give you an allotment of tickets, and you're going to have to go out and sell those tickets, right? So they'll give you 100 tickets. If you can sell 100 tickets, then you've earned your spot on the bill. So that's also a pay-to-play scenario. But it's kind of like you're not paying out of pocket. You're essentially just moving more tickets to help support the show, and it makes yourself look good because you're going out and you're proving to that promoter or that that headlining act that you do have a fan base and that you can help support the scene.
Do you think that having a large fan base actually helps you avoid having to pay to play?
I think you always have to pay to play in the big picture, no matter how big or small you are. If you're a small band starting out, you're going to have to go out and prove your worth, right? So again, going back to selling the tickets or buying onto a tour. If you get to the size of, say, a Lady Gaga or a Marilyn Manson, you're still paying to play because you're carrying these semi-trucks full of production, and that costs you money. So I think in any scenario, it is pay to play, but it's all a matter of, what your fan base is at that point. And the best thing you can do is to build a fan base. And with the internet now, you've got Facebook and Twitter, and I mean even MySpace is still around. All of these web outlets, these media outlets. I mean, it's nearly impossible, I think, nowadays to not build a fan base.
Right. And that's because back in the old days, I mean, people they didn't really have the internet. They had to, what would be their methods?
It was word of mouth. You know, it was word of mouth. Radio was huge back then.
Right.
I mean, radio's still big, but now with the internet, it's instantaneous.
Exactly.
You know, you can build a fan base. You can be based in Hollywood, California, and have, you know, a huge fan base in Japan or India or wherever. You know, so it's not like the old days. And I say the old days. I'm only 32. I mean, I wasn't around in the 50s and 60s and 70s where that was the real deal of, you know, word of mouth. But that's how they did it back then. Essentially, is, you know, you built your status up on radio, you sold records, and people came out to the shows. That was the only way they could see you. They weren't, you know, MTV came out in the early 80s, so there was no MTV, there was no real visual way to see anybody unless you went to concerts.
Right.
You know, and nowadays you've got YouTube and downloading, and it's
Yeah,
all
farms.
great, but, you know, I think that the audiences have shrunk, and they've become a little more particular about what they like because it's so instantaneous. It's on tap. You don't
Right.
have to buy entire records now. You can buy singles.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think it's don't quote me on this, but I think that the industry had changed to where instead of selling an actual million records that makes you platinum, it was selling a million units, which I believe they consider a single download as a unit.
Really?
So literally, you could have a million downloads and be certified platinum. I'm not sure of that, but I heard that. So, you know, the internet was a game changer. Yeah, for sure.
Well, another question. I've seen bands such as I'll say Korn.
Okay.
They
Great
I remember-
drummer, by the way. The new drummer they have, Ray
Yeah.
Lucier. Amazing drummer.
There's a tour that they are on, and they happen to have Ben Sevenfold playing the same concert as them. And basically, I heard that Davis, he got sick, so he couldn't perform. And they asked the singer Ben Sevenfold, Matthew Shadows, they asked him, "Can you sing some of the songs for, you know, in his place?" Let's say that somebody on Blood on the Dance Floor, one of them got sick. If you need somebody to fill in that part, where should somebody go to fill in that musical part? Like, just as a temporary, not a permanent.
That's tough. I mean, that's usually, I would say 99.99% of the time, that would be a call for the actual artist. And a lot of that usually happens, like if it's, you know, a friend of the band or something. You know, if you're at that status where you're headlining decent-sized venues and you have a direct support band that you're really close with, you're friends with, and they can manage, you know, to fill in if one of the guys gets sick or something, that's usually where you would go, you know, or not even necessarily if it's a support act, if it's a very close friend of the band that can perform the parts the way they need to be performed, that's where you would go. I mean, it's not like we would literally just call somebody from a
studio musician.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in certain situations for certain bands, you know, like say a John Mayer or somebody where he has his own band, but a lot of the musicians that he plays with, sometimes they come, sometimes they go. So, you know, someone like that, where if it's just, you know, his drummer or somebody, you can always find a fill-in. But if it's a front man or something, you know, you got to be a little bit more particular because you're looking for someone that is going to uphold the musical and visual image and representation of the band. You know, so, and especially with a group like Blown on the Dance Floor, it's a little more difficult because they are. What's the word? It's a very, very special type of show. So you couldn't just randomly pull, you know, someone out of LA that has the look but can't do the part. You know?
Well, as far as that, as far as I understand, Jay wasn't originally in the band. So how did that come to be? Like, how did you guys pick him up? He's not a random guy, is he? Like,
no, that happened long before I came on the band's been around. Dollies been doing this, I think, for about 6 years. And I came on last December, so I'm relatively new to the camp. But my understanding is that Dolly had gone through some member changes over the years, and he had met Jay and heard Jay sing, and like I guess a week later or something, he called him and said, "Hey, I'd like for you to join, Blown on Dance." So, and that's how that came to be. And I believe at that time they didn't even have a full band. It was literally just the 2 guys, and they would go out with their iPod and perform that way. So it's grown from essentially Davi by himself to different members throughout the years to Davi and Jay, and then eventually adding in the live band. And you can tell by the newer music and stuff. If you go back to the older records that have like Candyland and I'm a Monster, it's more electronic feel, whereas the newer stuff, the new Evolution record and this new EP, it's a very, very much a live band aspect. There's a lot of a lot of fans may hate to hear this, but there's a lot of the 80s metal influence with a lot of the guitar and stuff. You bring up bands like Avenged Sevenfold. A lot of the stuff they're doing, that was 80s rock and roll.
Exactly.
That's where it comes from. They modernized it for the modern time. But so the new stuff is very much a live band scenario.
As far as Avenged Sevenfold, I remember somewhere they had said that a lot of the things that they thought was kind of wrong with the music nowadays is that they're not really telling a story. So back in the 80s, if you had bands like Judas Priest, they would be, telling a story through their music, and that's kind of what Avenged Sevenfold would do. Is that what Blood on the Dance Floor is trying to do as far as now? Like 80s influence, trying to add some story to their music?
I believe so. I think every true artist has a message that they're trying to convey to the audience, and especially with Blood, it's all about love and support and equality and just tolerance for everybody. And you listen to some of the lyrics and they're very controversial and it's very in your face, but I think we kind of live in a society right now where everything it's talked about very quietly and it's not discussed.
And they're the ones screaming it out.
They're the ones that are screaming it out, exactly. And a lot of people will turn a blind eye, or there's a lot of people that will essentially have a complete and utter meltdown when they hear the music or they see the visual aspect. But it's all about getting everyone's attention initially, so you can bring them in. That's the thing is if you can capture their attention for just a moment, they can actually get what we're trying to give, as opposed to just it goes in one ear and out the other. So that I think that's the idea with the big visual aspect and the style of the band is it's all about capturing everyone's attention initially right off the bat and then reeling them in with the music. So it's a very good tactic that I think a lot of artists should practice more. You go back, like you brought up the Judas Priest, and you can
people are going to see a show.
Yeah, I mean, you go back into the days of Black Sabbath and the Judas Priest and even Alice Cooper and stuff.
Yeah.
Those guys were shock rockers. I mean, there was controversy surrounding them, and I think that's why a lot of fans jumped on the bandwagon initially, was because it was completely against the norm. I mean, you can even go back to the days of Elvis Presley, where they wouldn't film him on television from the waist down because it was too controversial, and now he's known as the king of rock and roll.
Exactly.
So, I think they're bringing back the shock rock element to the full effect, but there is a definitive message behind it, and that message is one love, equality. And all you have to do is scratch the surface. And I think a lot of people nowadays aren't willing to, because they just want to take stuff at face value. That's the society we live in. But hey, we're getting them one person, one show at a time.
That's cool. I'm sure a lot of fans are probably wonder what it's like being on the road with Blood on the Dance Floor. If you had to say, like, even a few memories, like what's the most embarrassing story that you can tell?
The most embarrassing story, as far as things that were embarrassing for me, or just in general?
Just in general.
I can't really think of anything embarrassing.
What about for you personally?
I mean, little things embarrass me, like, you know, if I forget to put a name on the guest list or something for him, you know, and he's not happy, that's embarrassing. But I don't know. I think it takes a lot to embarrass me nowadays, simply because I've worked with a fair amount of artists in my lifetime, and I'm very grateful for that. In a very short amount of time, I've been very fortunate. But I mean, I've been in situations where, you know, I've worked with very, very well-known female artists, you know, today, you know, they're very well-known, and, you know, I've seen them topless or naked or, you know, whatever, and you know, it's not shocking to me anymore. It's just, it's a job.
Kind of comes with the territory.
It does. It comes with the territory, and you have to know when to be, you know, when, you know, you have to know when it's personal and when it's business. So, but as far as embarrassing, I think maybe, I wouldn't say embarrassing, but one of the worst things that I've had to deal with was on a previous tour. Our former keyboardist, who we all loved to death, he had some health issues, and we literally 10 minutes before we were starting our show, I had to take him to the hospital and get him checked out and everything, and we essentially missed the show. The band played without him, and they dedicated the show to him, but that was a little scary, just simply because, you know, we didn't know what was wrong with him, and, you know, it turns out he was just sleep deprivation and dehydration, you know. So the road, she's a cruel mistress. If you don't take care of yourself, it can chew you up pretty fast. It's not all sex, drugs, and rock and roll. You got to sleep at some point. So,
have you guys had buses as far as touring? I mean,
yeah, they. I mean, you know, when they started, it was basically, I think Davi had like a little, his mom was using his mom's car, you know, initially, and it's graduated to, you know, a van and a trailer, and then they've used a bandwagon, which is kind of in between an RV and a bus, and then last year they were on Warp, they had a tour bus, and this year, you know, we've done a van and trailer for a couple small runs, but primarily we do buses, just because we have a lot of staff. And, you know, my thing, again, it comes back to taking care of everybody. After a 16, 18-hour workday, you know, I want to be able to make sure that the crew can lay down flat and sleep. Nobody has to drive.
Yeah.
Everyone can just rest, because, you know, even if we're doing smaller venues, 300, 400, 500, 600 cap, we still have a lot of toys that we bring in and set up, and we have a minimal amount of people to set it up with. So, I like bus touring. It's the only way to travel. If you're going to be on the road, do it in a bus or a private jet.
Because I figure, like, in a van, you're all piling on top of each other, and if you can't make a pit stop, you're pissing in water bottles and tossing them out the window or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, before I got into tour managing, I myself had played in a band, and we had a record deal some time back. I was actually the front of house sound guy and the tour manager for the band, and they let their bass player go, and they asked me to join, so I became an official member. But yeah, I mean, I've been in those scenarios before where, you know, you don't have time to make a piss stop, so it's like you cut a hole in the van and run a tube through it. You know, I will say though that I think for bands coming up, van touring is a great thing, because you're all in close quarters. So you really get to know each other, and you really
have to.
Yeah, I mean, you really get to find out if, you know, I mean, you know, essentially you're married to these people. I mean, being in a band, really, it's a very humorous way to look at it, but it's like you're married to 3 or 4 or 5 people that you can't have sex with, right? So, you know, when you travel like that in a very close space, where there's not a lot of personal space, you really get to find out, are these the people that I want to make a career with? Can we hang together? Can we really, make it? And I think it's a key thing for a lot of bands coming up is, don't worry about the buses and the arenas and the big shows just yet. You got to put your work in. It takes time. It's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll. Bands that are nothing one night and then an overnight success, they don't last very long because they haven't had enough time or experience to really, mature as a band, as individuals, as a unit. So, band touring is great. It really, really is. You get to a point where if you get big enough, obviously a band's not accommodating anymore. So, but I think that every band should tour in a van at least for 2 years.
Yeah. That's cool.
If you can't make it in a van, you can't make it.
So, Brian, as a question, so
Yeah.
you're saying being in a band with 4 or 5 guys, I'm sure it's got to be a very existential moment. And again, being it's kind of almost like building up a family, right? Developing a family together. And how is it like to be able to I don't know if you've been in the predicament of touring with a band, but then again, working with other clients. Is it tough? Is it difficult? Is it overwhelming?
I think that's a 2-part question.
Right.
I myself, when I played in a band, we were basically in a band for a long time, and we did 2 tours in a bus. They're very expensive. The singer and I have almost gotten fist fights and things like that. But that's where, again, coming back to, like you said, building that family. There's no family on the planet that everything is, what I say is bubblegum and blowjobs every day. Real life is not always sunshine and candy every day. But that's just like a family or a marriage. You appreciate the good times because you go through the bad times, and that's what makes everybody tighter. It makes everybody closer.
Makes you appreciate it.
It makes you appreciate it much more if you're smart.
Right.
As far as working with multiple clients, I typically like to do one client at a time. I always make a joke that I always seem to get the problem children. Saying that meaning that it's not just like, there's nothing typical in this business. What I view as typical in the entertainment industry, a lot of people would probably commit suicide. Because it's a very high-stress environment. But that said, dealing with one particular artist, or one client, such as a Blood on the Dance Floor, or a Lady Gaga or Katy Perry, those artists, they're on a different wavelength. They see the world and they interact with the world at such a different level. It's very similar to like how Michael Jackson would. He lives in his own world, and his world is very, very big, and that's why he's the king of pop. That's why people pay, thousands of dollars to go see one show. So, when you deal with an artist like that, it takes up a lot of your time and a lot of your energy because everything needs to be bigger. It's not just bass, drums, guitar, throw it up, let's go. It's an event. It's not just a show. So, I've done multiple clients in the past, and I've shied away from it simply because I like to work with clients that are a challenge, So, and these guys are definitely that. In the most loving way possible, they are a challenge, and I welcome the challenge.
All right. Well, this is Chain Reaction in Anaheim, and this is again RJ. Before you stick the pin in the doll, is there anything you'd like to shout out to the fans?
Oh my goodness. Stay in school, go to college, get a master's degree, listen to your parents, and then decide if you want to join a rock band.
Sweet. All right. Take it easy, man.
Peace, guys.